GoForThe2.com. These are my Week 12 predictions for the college football season. Before I get into them, though, I want to talk about the Thursday night game, North Carolina and Virginia. I'll have a written breakdown and prediction for that game up on the website at GoForThe2.com under the NCAA pick section Thursday morning up on the website, so check that out. Friday night's games, there's a couple of them. Hawaii and Air Force, Florida Atlantic, and Florida International. I've written breakdowns and predictions for those games up on the website under the NCAA pick section, so check that out Friday morning. Let's get right into the picks for this weekend. I spoke about one of them, Wake Forest traveling to Notre Dame to take on the third-ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I think Notre Dame gets a dominant victory this weekend. Wake Forest struggling to score points. They're only averaging 20.1 points per game. The Notre Dame defense, number one in the country in terms of points surrendered, only giving up 11.1 points per game. But more importantly, it's the Wake Forest offense struggling. Statistically, only 88th in the country in passing, 114th in the country in rushing, only averaging 102 yards per game. I think the running game of Notre Dame will wear down Wake Forest. On the road, they're giving up 164 yards rushing per game. Notre Dame's offense averaging 198 yards per game. I think that's the difference. The physicality on the offense and defensive lines will wear down Wake Forest. I think Notre Dame and Brian Kelly get a dominating victory, 40-10 over Wake Forest. I know a couple of weeks ago they struggled against Pitt. They had a lackluster performance last week against Boston College, but I think Notre Dame has their eye on the national championship game, and I think they do show their true colors this weekend and get a dominating home win, 40-10 over Wake Forest. Notre Dame's opponent in a couple of weeks, USC, travels to UCLA to take on the Bruins. This is a rivalry game. It's a crosstown rival, but it's two teams, in my opinion, headed in opposite directions. USC headed, in my opinion, for mediocrity under head coach Lane Kiffin, while UCLA 8-2 in the overall, 5-2 in the Pac-12. Jim Mora Jr. doing a great job in his first year as head coach. He's a Coach of the Year candidate this year and duly deserved. He has a very physical defense. They've been playing a different style than they did a couple of years ago under Rick Neuheisel and formerly under former head coach Carl Durrell. They weren't as physical on defense over the last few years. They've shown a different type of attitude defensively, and that's why I like the Bruins in this ball game. Couple that with the running game of Jonathan Franklin. He's the difference. He'll take a lot of pressure off of redshirt freshman Brett Hundley. More importantly, though, when you look at the UCLA offense, they're averaging 496 yards per game. When you look at the USC defense, in their three losses to Stanford, Oregon, and Arizona, not only did they turn the ball over 11 times in those three losses, but they gave up a ton of yards. Against Arizona, they gave up 618. Against Oregon, they were torched for 720 yards. Total offense. They cannot afford to do that against UCLA, and I think that's the difference. UCLA's running attack wears down USC, and I think they pick up a 27-21 victory at home as Jim Mora Jr. goes to 9-2, and the Bruins knock off USC for the first time in 6 meetings. USC has won 5 straight, but I think UCLA picks up a 27-21 victory this time out as they move to 9-2. Let's talk about another team right now, Kansas State. They're number 1 in the BCS. They're number 1 in the AP. All eyes are on Kansas State as they took over the top spot after Alabama's loss last week. I think this could be a trap game for Kansas State and Colin Klein. I know that Colin Klein's a Heisman Trophy candidate. He's the front runner after Alabama lost to A&M last week, and McCarron basically lost that game at the end on the goal line. He was my front runner up until that interception. Now Colin Klein takes that top spot away for the Heisman, but I think this is a trap game for the Wildcats. Baylor's offense is averaging 564 yards per game. I think they have the ability to stretch the defense of Kansas State, and this is back-to-back road games for the Wildcats. They have a very good quarterback, Baylor does, in Nick Florence, and a very underrated head coach in Art Briles, and I'm calling for the upset. Baylor gets a 40-37 victory at home over Kansas State. I know, call me crazy, but I'm calling for the upset in Waco this weekend. Kansas State goes down and surrenders the top spot. Let's talk about another team. Let's talk about Vanderbilt and Tennessee. James Franklin and the Commodores have won 4 straight. They picked up a victory last week over Ole Miss on the road, 27-26, while Tennessee and Derek Dooley had a chance to pick up their first SEC victory, but they surrendered and they gave up a touchdown with basically 20 seconds left on a 4th and 12 to James Franklin in Missouri. The game went into triple overtime, and Missouri got the victory over Tennessee, 51-48. There's been rumors this week about Derek Dooley being out as head coach. Meanwhile, the Commodores have bought into James Franklin. They're bowl eligible, and they're playing very well. I like the quarterback of James Rodgers and Jordan Rodgers, and I like Zach Stacy at running back. More importantly, I just feel that Tennessee at this point in the season's basically quit after last week's performance at home, after dropping yet another SEC ball game. There's only so much emotional state a team can take and drop heartbreaking losses. They lost a couple weeks ago to South Carolina. Couple that with this home loss to Missouri. And even when you look a couple weeks ago, they struggled at home against Troy. Now they travel to Nashville. Very lackluster performance, in my opinion, last week for the Volunteers. I thought they would dominate Missouri. They lost. So now I'm looking for Tennessee to throw in the towel. I think Vanderbilt picks up a dominating performance, 30-10 over Tennessee. One more game. Let's talk about Miami and South Florida. The Bulls have lost quarterback B.J. Daniels a couple of weeks ago in the UConn game. He went down with basically a broken ankle or a broken leg. It was conflicting reports on what he heard exactly. It was originally said an ankle, but they're going up with the backup quarterback. But when you look at this South Florida team, all eyes have to be on head coach Skip Holtz. He managed to dismantle everything Jim Leavitt did to build up that program. If you remember basically in 2007, South Florida was ranked number 2 in the country when they went on the road to face Rutgers. They lost that ball game, but at that time, quarterback Matt Grody was the quarterback, but they were number 2 in the country under head coach Jim Leavitt. Now, under Skip Holtz, they are basically headed for another subpar 500 season. He had a very senior-laden offense, Skip Holtz did, but he failed to allow B.J. Daniels early in the season to improvise and use his athletic ability. He likes to play conservative, in my opinion, Skip Holtz. He's another coach out on the hot seat as South Florida has underachieved, and I think Miami, when you look at them, they had a very tough road loss to Virginia. They dropped a 41-40 victory, but I like the vertical passing game of Stephen Morris, and I like the running backs with Duke Johnson and Mike James, and I think Al Golden will have his troops ready. I know this is an in-state rivalry game. They lost last year, Miami did. I think Miami has revenge on its mind. They are more superior on offense, and I think the Hurricanes get a dominating victory at home, 35-17 over South Florida. Let's talk about one more team. Syracuse got a very dominating victory at home, in my opinion, over a top 5 team in Louisville with a quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater. I think Louisville was one of the most underrated teams in the country going up last week. They had a disheartening loss in the Carrier Dome, but they are a very good ball club. When you look at what Ryan Nassib and the offense did last week against the Louisville defense, that was a very strong performance at home for the Orange, and I think that carries over this week as they play Missouri. I know Missouri had a triple overtime victory over Tennessee, but I like the running game of Syracuse, and I think they pick up the victory on the road. I know it's an SEC opponent versus a Big East, but you really can't look at Missouri as a top caliber SEC team. They're newly formed from the Big 12. I like the way Syracuse runs the football. I like what Doug Marrone has done. They've had a very tough schedule this year, but they seem to be gelling offensively later in the season. They had some red zone problems earlier in the year. They've seemed to fix those, and I like Syracuse on the road to get the upset against Missouri in Columbia, Missouri this weekend. I think Syracuse picks up a 30-20 victory on the road at Missouri. So those are the predictions this weekend. Stay with us all season long at GoForThe2.com. We'll have our written recap Monday and Tuesday, and I'll give a couple of podcasts of the weekend's action earlier in the week. So check it out at GoForThe2.com.